Hi. Well, welcome to Wednesday, April 11th. I hope you're all still enjoying your Easter celebration. You've all heard the old saying, be careful what you wish for. Well, today we're going to begin to see that in the case of the Israelites, they are going to get it. And they wanted a king, and God is going to give them one. As Heather reminded us yesterday, just like everyone else, they're going to get their king. And the king is going to be, as we find out in our readings today, Saul, a man, a Benjamite, a tribe of Benjamin. And there are some things, first off, that we see initially that maybe might be considered good traits for someone who would be king, and that is a certain amount of humility. In chapter 9, verse 21, he says, "But am I not a Benjamite from the smallest tribe of Israel?" In chapter 10, verse 22, when they are Samuel has all the tribes together, and he's down to Benjamin, and he's choosing amongst the clans, and gets down to Saul, and where is he? He's not here. The Lord tells them he's over there hiding amongst the baggage, and sure enough, there he is. Now that was kind of curious to me. All of the commentators either didn't say anything about it, or basically said, again, he was showing his humility. I just found it a little curious that someone whom God said is going to be king is hiding amongst the baggage, the equipment. But anyway, be that as it may, we then find later in chapter 10 that after Samuel says this is who's going to be king, there are a group of people who were not happy about that, and as it says in verse 27, they despised him and brought him no gifts. Now, the interesting thing is Saul's response to that is to keep silent. We could certainly see someone who has come to power and is now king to immediately take hold of them and throw them in prison or have them executed or whatever it may be. But Saul is showing some restraint here, and so there's some characteristics about him that initially at least you feel like, well, maybe this is an okay choice. Maybe he's not so bad. Anyway, after all the hoopla, Saul and everyone else goes home, and Saul goes back to his family farm where he continues to work. I find that just kind of interesting that the king would go back to his family farm and go to work. But it seems to show that all the pieces are not yet in place as we make this transition. And I think it shows that Saul himself has not quite put all of this together yet. We aren't quite at a monarchy yet. Maybe, we've announced a king at this point, but, he hasn't really led anything yet, and so we still have a ways to go. And not the least of which, as we next find out in this account of Nahash at Jabesh Gilead, Nahash of the Ammonites coming in to attack, that Israel is still very fragmented. We don't have like one country, and now Saul is their king, and he's been elected by them and appointed, and he will take over. You basically have this loose conglomeration of cities and tribes, and we see that here, where the one tribe, the one group is making an agreement on its own with an enemy. And says, give us 7 days, we're going to find out from our brethren if they'll come to support us. If not, then we'll give in to your demands. Nahash must have really thought that no one was going to come, because he says, okay. And what I found very interesting about that little piece, and I don't know if you did, was we know what Saul's response is, and I'll talk about that in a minute. It relates to the point of today's lesson. But I wonder if there were any other tribes that responded at all, or if they all just went about their business and said, they're on their own. We aren't told anything, but it certainly wouldn't be surprising given the nature of the way the Israelites had been acting. But anyway, it doesn't matter, because when these messengers come to the Benjamites and come to Saul and his clan, if he had been wondering to himself, what's this whole idea of being king all about, the answer comes there in I believe it's in chapter 11, verse 6, where the messengers tell him the story, and it says, when Saul heard these words, the Spirit of God came upon him in power, and he burned with anger. At that point, God led him into action. And there's some significant things that come out of this, and that really I want us to maybe think about and pay attention to today. We know he goes on to lead the people to victory over the Ammonites, but more importantly are these two things. Number one, at that point now, the people acclaim Saul as their king. It took a while. And some at first were not responsive to it. Some maybe even still wanted judges. But the reality is they responded to Saul's plea, and he leads them. The second thing is he leads them in victory over an enemy. And that really solidifies his position. So we learned that leadership has to be earned. And Saul and the people again see that ultimately victory is in the hands of God. And it's accomplished only through God. So all of that being said, from judge to king, from Samuel to Saul, we see the same pattern over and over. The people sinned, and here they sinned by wanting a king rather than their God. They acknowledge their sin, and they are forgiven and move forward. God is still their God at this point, even though now we're moving into from judgeships into monarchies. We also learn Samuel's changing his roles. Not retiring, but obviously he must kind of step aside as Saul takes the reins as king. So, and I think that's important for the people to see, and I think it's good for us to know that God loves us and continues to bless us, and it's really not based upon what we do. It's part of His covenant with us that He had made, and in our case, through the shed blood of Jesus, we are forgiven and we are loved, not because we earn it. Samuel is going to continue to counsel people and king alike, and the reality is, in the end, it's up to them to obey or disobey. And I guess that word of counsel is for us as well. Do we obey? Do we disobey? And we're going to move forward now. Now we move into how does this whole kingship idea work for the Israelites and for Saul as we move forward. Some very interesting times coming. Look forward to reading with you about them as we go forward. Have a great day.